Welcome to White People, Black Music, and Liberation. I'm Eric, and I'm here on the journey with you. This is a transmission at the intersection of race, music, and spirituality. It's about moving past the programming and into liberation. So today I wanted to go a little bit deeper into cultural appropriation, recognizing harm, acknowledging impact, and taking responsibility. This conversation started with a email that I sent on our Orchestra Gold newsletter about cultural appropriation. And that email was quite similar to the previous episode on here about cultural appropriation. And then in response to that, I got a quite long message from someone on that email list. And in that message, the person told me that the narrative around cultural appropriation was harmful, and that all people should have the right to play music without feeling guilt and shame. I think I've been in a position where I have had similar thoughts too in earlier stages. And it brings up some interesting questions. Is the narrative itself around cultural appropriation harmful? Or is it calling attention to harm that was already there? I think at the core of this is an assumption that if we just didn't talk about cultural appropriation, there wouldn't be a problem. And I gotta be honest, to me that feels backwards. So just thinking about the system that we live in, it's a culture that centers whiteness, a culture of supremacy. And that culture has created unequal access to resources, to opportunities, to platforms, to safety, even to being heard. And those imbalances show up in music too. So what happens when someone who's been given a lot of access because of the color of their skin, and that person takes music, imagery, traditions from another culture and uses it in ways that are disconnected from the source? Now, that's not just neutral, it can cause harm. And it's also not the same thing as when a person who doesn't have a lot of access takes something from the people who do have a lot of access, because there isn't institutional momentum behind that person. And this causes harm, especially when that music or tradition comes from a different context. It can come from a place born of struggle, of oppression, of survival. And because of power dynamics and cultural programming, we often fail to see or recognize that harm. And so for some of us, i.e. for me, it can come as a shock when that harm is finally reflected back to me, because I've lived without seeing the impact of it for so long. And I've been there and I've done that. Shelley Touchlook talks about this in the context of native and indigenous practices, how people will take a little something somewhere from a culture they barely know, build a business around it, and how that reproduces a very long history of extraction, of theft. So to say that the conversation about appropriation is what's harmful, to me that's confusing cause and effect. The real harm isn't the discomfort we feel when someone names appropriation. The harm is the system that creates that. especially when that appropriation is so easy and so invisible. So now let's talk about guilt and shame, something I have a lot of experience with. Because that came up in the response too, and it's real. I know that when I was unconscious, when I wasn't seeing how I was complicit in this system, I was feeling a lot of guilt and shame. And I tried to avoid those feelings. Over time, as I bring more and more light of awareness to the situation, I become more willing to learn and more willing to acknowledge harm. Those feelings have started to ease up. And it wasn't just because I understand more. It wasn't just around education. It's a spiritual transformation, because it's coming into more wholeness, coming from a place of fragmentation and moving into more wholeness. And the fragmentation was where I wasn't able to see the harm that I was causing, and I wasn't able to acknowledge it. And then this entire process has taken a very long time for me. It's not something that's happened overnight. It's been years in the unfolding. And then from acknowledgement, I am then able to take steps to reduce harm and generate good on the other side of the equation. So I don't think that the guilt and the shame are random. I think they are the natural result of unconsciousness. And to me, in my life, the guilt and shame were a signal that something was out of balance. They were a signal that I was out of reciprocity, that I was taking more than I was giving, or that I was causing more harm that I was able to give back. So when I started to become able to see the harm, I was able to allow that guilt and shame to become my teachers. So to bring it all home, the conversation around cultural appropriation isn't the problem. And I don't think that avoiding the conversation is useful. We have lots of experience in avoiding the conversation here in this country. But it's really that there is a deeper system at play that centers whiteness and makes extraction, cultural appropriation invisible. And that's what's causing harm. Okay. That's enough for now. I'm wishing you all my blessings. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. Bye. I'm Eric, and this has been White People, Black Music, and Liberation. If this message speaks to you and you want to be part of the journey, head to whitepeopleblackmusic.com, and let's build a world where liberation is for everyone.